must listen carefully.
What up, peeps? This is Henry, and I am with Lodro Rinzler today on the Ghetto podcast, and I am super stoked to have you here today. I actually never really even thought I would get to talk to you or anything like that, besides just the idea sparking in my mind, But for a lot of the people that are listening that don't know who you are, can you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. First of all, thanks for having me here. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me about these topics. So my name is Lodro. I have been teaching meditation for 20 years now. I was actually born and raised Buddhist. So my parents studied with Tibetan Buddhist teacher Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche in their 20s. And by the time I rolled around, it had already sort of, this meditation thing had already been established in the house. So I started practicing on my own when I was about 6. And they found me in a corner, sort of staring at a wall. And I think most
that's awesome.
Been, a little nervous about that. And over dinner, they asked me what I was doing. And I said I was meditating. And I said, what does that mean? And they said, well, I just noticed that I was breathing. And when I got distracted, I came back. And they said, yeah, that's basically it.
That's awesome.
Which is true. So I started young, started doing like meditation retreats in my teens. By the time I had gone out to attend university, I had already done a lot of long retreats. So I started this little meditation group on campus, and people were sort of being imported to teach the meditation there, and they got sick of commuting in. So they basically said, done all the requirements for teacher training. Why don't you go and do it? So I started teaching a long time ago, which has meant there's been 10,000 mistakes along the way. But, at this point, I feel like I've been doing this for a while. My first book came out 9 years ago now, actually, almost to the day.
Crazy.
And and that was The Buddha Walks into a Bar. And
that's one of my favorites. I go to that book off like yearly at least.
Very kind of you. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely the one that reached the most people. I mean, that's like 100,000 copies are out there in people's hands. And it's sort of crazy to think that happened. So I wrote a number of other books along the same sort of topic of bringing meditation into everyday life, and started a number of businesses, nonprofits along the way. Some continue on, some have come and gone, and all under that theme of trying to make meditation really accessible to everyone. And that's the big work that I do. So it's a very long intro. I apologize. But
No, I love it for sure. That's great. And so I think the part that really drew me to the Buddha Walks into a Bar and everything else was just how it had the tone of like you speaking personally to the reader. And I think that's even felt even more so with the audiobook version, because it's you reading it, so it's just that much more personal, right? But it also, it's got a tonality where even on the first episode, we were talking about how it's very welcoming. Right. And in Buddhism and with myself, my own experience, it's been very welcoming, and it's been very easy for me to, go in my own path where it's like, I'm not necessarily calling myself Buddhist, but I can take so much from all these lessons. Right. And that was the Buddha Walks into a Bar. That was it for me, telling me you can still do all of these things and just practice this mindfulness throughout your day and gain so much from it. Right. But then I think the other part that got me was that you being so young, right, especially at the time of writing the book, and even at the time of starting to teach meditation, right, it's like it'd be so great if everybody could find a way to start practicing these things early on, or as soon as possible, right? So that you can really learn to enjoy your life on a day-to-day, on a moment-to-moment basis, and like just have that much more just joy with everyone else, right? It's just like learning that as soon as possible could just enrich your life so much more. And I think that's the important part, and teaching that is great.
Yeah. It's funny that you mention that, because I feel like, yes, first of all, you don't have to become a Buddhist to study what the Buddha taught. The Buddha wasn't a Buddhist.
Right.
He was a guy like you and me who was like, I'm sick and tired of suffering. I'm sick and tired of all the way I keep myself locked in pain. And he sought out to do something about it. So some of the most basic stuff that he teaches that we would call in the West mindfulness meditation, for example, it really is this tool of just you don't have to subscribe to anything. It's just me working with my own mind so that I don't keep myself locked in the stories that cause me pain.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens when we sort of step back from that,
Right.
we actually have more space in the present moment to say, oh, yeah, as you said earlier, I can choose joy. I can
Right.
choose. And it's not like some Pollyanna, like, oh, everything's going right in my life. But where do we want to spend our mental energy?
Right. It's a very realistic way of just injecting that joy into your life, because we all think we know so much, right? But if we all really analyze, the true root of our ideas or our feelings or wherever it is that they come from, you end up realizing that most of the time they come from a place of not knowing. And at that moment you gain so much clarity, understanding that it's okay not to know. It's fine. Just be okay with that and just continue on your own way. It's just so much easier to deal with certain things in a way that you inject that spaciousness between subjects and between those feelings and thoughts as you're going. And going back into like the teaching side of it, right? It's once you start learning about it and start doing it in your own life, you gain so much from it that you have the necessity to teach others about it, because like you gain so much. It's just like if you listen to a great song and you immediately start telling people, have you heard this song? Have you heard this song? It's like, have you started learning how to be happy? Like, it'd be great. So you being able to teach that and continue on at a young age, continuing with the books, because if I'm not mistaken, 6 books so far.
Yeah, that's correct.
And this upcoming book, coming February 9th, would that be your 7th or your 6th?
It's my 7th book. Yeah, which is
7th.
bananas to say out loud. But I took a number of years off. I started a company called Mindful, which was a network of meditation studios. I co-founded that. And that really sort of sucked me down this wormhole of really just focusing on that for a number of years. And then I exited, 2019 or top of 2019, something like that. And it gave me like some space to actually start to contemplate new projects, new ways of being. And the one thing that I was seeing felt like everyone was coming to me and saying, like, I can't deal with the anxiety in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember particularly, I mean, this must have been 2019 because it was pre-pandemic. I was actually at a dinner with a number of loved ones. And at some point, the topic came politics, which is obviously still very potent now. And a family member of mine just clammed up. There were only a few of us, so it was very noticeable. And at the end, as we were getting our coats on, I just sort of checked in. I said, how are you doing over there? And he goes, at this point, I need to watch a half hour of animal videos every night just to get to sleep.
Yeah.
And I had no idea that this loved one had gotten so bad in terms of the anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And I have struggled, I'll say,
right.
with anxiety. It's not like all of a sudden I've transcended anxiety.
Right.
But I've learned better tools to work with it. And I thought, if we're all sort of secretly wandering around with this monkey on our back of anxiety, I don't know anyone who doesn't struggle with it. Like, we've got to actually start talking about it. We've actually start to have dialogues and make it a normal thing that we address and work with.
Mm-hmm. And we can share from our own experiences. It's not something that we need to hide, right? Being able to share and be open about those experiences will allow others to learn about them. But at the same time, we need to be receptive to the feedback that we may receive about those experiences. And again, because of this social compression, right? There's so much out there that it just feels like they're squeezing every aspect of you. Like if you have all that and you combine it with not knowing how to deal with it, and then not being able to communicate that with anybody else, with yourself, or receiving those guidance, that guidance from other people, it makes things very difficult, right? But at some point, like at least with me, I was in that state of mind. I was, when I started going down this path, there was like this social compression, but it was against like other things that, like, like the political thing wasn't as heated as it is now. But in the same token, there was so much going on in my life that it felt very draining. And I was in that state of mind where I'm not receptive to what people are saying. I'm very analytical, so I'm breaking everything down. And your books allowed me to take that perspective and be more open about it, have it be more welcoming. And man, do we need that right now? Because it's not like things have gotten any better. And even if they do, and even if they don't, regardless, we're going to need to figure out how to adapt to all these situations that we're not going to have the control over. We're not.
Beautifully put. I mean, there's always going to be stressors in our life. For some people, it might be romantic things, going through a breakup, or that could be a really big stressor. For some people, it might be work, big deadlines, finding work in this economy, whatever it might be. So there's always going to be sort of like a big stressor. We figure out our work life, it's our romantic life. We figure out our romantic life, we're in a fight with our sibling, whatever it is, there's going to be stressors. Knowing that, what do we do with the mind? And I think, I should actually name the book. I'm always bad about these things, but the book is called Take Back Your Mind, Buddhist Advice for Anxious Times. And that's the idea. We're just taking back the mind. So the classic example that I often early on is, if I offered you the choice, do you want to be happy or do you want to feel stress? What would you say?
Want to be happy.
Right. This, oddly enough, has 100% success rate, this question.
Right. Yeah.
No one says they want to feel stressed. So in that moment, you just made a choice. You said, I'm choosing happiness over stress. All we're doing is training the mind to do that regularly. Because with the mind's inherent negativity bias, it loves to go to the stressful situations. It loves to latch on and say, what if this happens? What if that happens? But when we unhook ourselves from those stories, what do we find underneath? We actually find a sense of peace, calm, happiness, joy, as you said earlier, in the present moment. So what we're doing here is, in a formal meditation, and I'll say in the book, there's, yes, formal meditation, but then also lots of on-the-spot techniques. But what we do is we sit there with the breath. We notice when the mind wanders off into one of those what if stories, for example. We acknowledge it, and we don't choose stress in that moment. We choose to come back to the present moment. And that literally rewires the brain.
Yep.
It literally retrains the brain to not focus on every single stressor that triggers us.
Right.
So we don't hold ourselves in anxiety.
Yep. And you can definitely analyze it at that point, and you can start learning how to be more honest with yourself and about your reactions to things. And it's just, just interjecting that spaciousness. And even then, like you said, at first I used to think that meditation had to be formal. You're right. I thought that you had to, in order for meditation to count, right, you needed to have that time to just sit and be with your breath, and you needed to make that. But you can literally do anything with some level of mindfulness, and it helps because it still trains your mind to adapt to those situations, to have spaciousness in those situations. And equally with relationships, right? Like, that's being a hot topic among a lot of people, right? Like a lot of younger people, especially. You learn to inject this spaciousness into your experiences with others. You start feeling just honest. I mean, I feel like it's more open-heartedness, right? So if you are talking about relationships, you're able to fall in love just that much better, right? You're able to learn about your partner that much better, and your situations, right? And then that in itself is a domino effect, because then you start learning how to deal with those situations in the outside world. And it's you can gain so much from it, from just the little things you do every day, right? Like, even with, because like, you have a month of mindfulness going on right now, and it's helped me so like a lot, because a lot of the times I don't do a lot of guided meditations. But doing the guided meditations, it's really nice to, like, even of my own meditation, right, to allow there to be that spaciousness between what's driving the meditation. Oh, that's such a load off, and I didn't even know. It's great. And there a lot of there are a lot of people doing the guided meditations, and you're also doing with the mindful company. There's a lot of teaching of mindful meditation to others. And how does that work, and how did that come about?
Yeah, so I think this is a longer answer as well, but years ago, the woman who's now my wife and I, we had just started dating, and we locked ourselves in a cabin, I want to say for 2 months, and we were both working remotely back before it was cool to do so. And we spent a lot of time in a very cramped space. And during that, I sort of stepped back from the work I was doing, and I put everything that I do on 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper, wrote out the thing that I was doing, put it on the wall. Hobbies, work, gigs, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, what's the common theme? And I said, okay. And I mentioned to you earlier, actually, the theme is, I'm making meditation as accessible as possible. And once I figured that out for myself, it was very easy to start saying, okay, so now anything that doesn't fit in that falls away. So what you were referring to earlier, it's the third time in a row that we've done the month of mindfulness. And this time it's 1,600 people. I think last year it was 1,000, before that 800. But it's sort of every year it's this major sort of ongoing thing where people from all over the world, I think we've got maybe 20 countries right now are doing this program. And I think just getting all of us meditating regularly is really important. And that's one of, like, as I mentioned before, 10,000 different things I do. I teach for Journey, which is live guided meditations on an app. I do my own online community. I have the Buddhist Immersion, which is a 5-month deep dive into the Buddhist studies, sort of what the Buddha actually taught in a structured way. I lead teacher trainings. I think this is the 6th year in a row that I've led a mindfulness teacher training. So it's a lot of different stuff, but it comes under that heading of, like, how can we make meditation accessible, particularly for people who are struggling, as you said, with anxiety and stress.
Mm-hmm. And there's just so much of that, especially right now, right? And then that's why I feel like the timing of this book is just so perfect because right now there's definitely a need for people to start learning how to handle those anxieties, because a lot of that is self-created. A lot of that is or if it isn't self-created, it's at least to a certain level self-controllable, right? And learning how to do that, especially in these times right now, now that we're in this pandemic and all these things are happening with the political climate and all these other things, man, we need it right now. And a book that specifically in its title is attacking that anxiety is very welcome for sure. How did that come about? When is it that you started writing this?
Yeah, just recently. I mean, really, it was the top of the year, I would say, pre-pandemic, but ultimately it sort of had been bubbling, and I'd been writing different things and thinking about different ways of publishing this. And then I was like, no, it's anxiety. This is the theme. So I took a bunch of stuff that I actually been working on for a number of years. And this year said, okay, starting fresh. And a lot of it fell on the cutting room floor, as it should in a good book. But some of it made it in, and a lot of new stuff was developed that specifically addresses our current time. The book was completed in June, so it's really, sort of like at the early stage of the pandemic, but it does talk a lot about our political situation, our pandemic situation, the economic situation, all of it. And I think, what you were talking about before, in that book, there's this analogy. It's a traditional Buddhist analogy of the 2 arrows. And the idea is that if you're walking through a forest, out of nowhere, an arrow comes and hits you in the shoulder. Now, what we know we should do is we should take the arrow out and tend to our healing. But what we often do is we start saying, who shot me? Oh my gosh, I bet it was Chuck. Chuck has always had it out for me. Everyone has it out for me. This is so typical. This only happens to me. And the stories we tell ourselves about the pain that has been inflicted, that's known as the second arrow. So the first arrow, unfortunately, is going to happen. There's going to be heartbreak. There's going to be things falling apart. There's going to be harm caused to us or that we cause to others. It is a part of being human, which is something that we actually sort of have to rectify and say and understand that, like, okay, unfortunately, like, we bump up against each other as humans, and stress and anxiety and all these things arise. What do we do with that?
Right.
Do we take the arrow out and tend to our healing and sort of look directly at it? Or do we start to layer story upon story upon story on it? And that keeps us locked in that state. We don't, the arrow isn't getting removed in that case.
Right. You end up forgetting that the arrow's even there. You're just worried so much about everything else. Now, another story that comes to mind when bringing up these stories, especially right now, I feel like I just keep getting reminded of, like, the story of Ashoka, right? And how, and I guess in my mind, in different ways, it's like, not only is this, very potent adversary in front of you, very threatening and, everything, right? You meet that moment with open-heartedness, right? And it could change that person completely. But at the same time, you have to be able to meet that event with that open heartedness, right? And within the books and within dealing with these anxieties and when dealing with all these things, I feel like that's where we're at. We should learn how to meet these really tough, challenging, threatening situations with a lot of open heartedness, and it would be contagious, right? I feel like if once you start doing that, you start teaching other people how to be and meet situations with open heartedness, and you can really be that change. And I feel like right now is a time where a lot of people, with the pandemic, all the changes that have been happening, people have been really questioning their own stance on their own life, on what they do, on who they're with, and all these things, right? And analyzing situations with open heartedness, I think they're finding that maybe what they're doing in life isn't what they want to do, right? Like they're coming to a crossroads where it's like, I want to change the world, but I'm just this or I'm just that, and they get down on that fact. But I feel like getting information from these open-hearted individuals and these books, these trainings, these meditations, looking inward and all these things, you're really actually doing a lot more than you think you are. You actually are helping the world out just by changing yourself and your own perspective and the reactions that you have, without having to change your vocation, without having to do any of that. If it comes to a point where it doesn't align with what you actually want out of your life, right? If it comes to a point where you see that it isn't bringing you any joy or anything, then that's the time to have that conversation with yourself. But, in every situation, if you get to it with open heartedness, you learn a lot from it.
Yeah, very well put. And I think what you pointed out earlier in terms of the moment that we're living in, I'm reminded of a part of a poem by the teacher I mentioned earlier, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, called Timely Rain, where he says, "In the garden of gentle sanity, may you be bombarded by coconuts of wakefulness." And these opening lines, I'm just sort of like, that's a great aspiration. That we've gone through periods of gentle sanity. And by gentle sanity, I want to be clear. We, like, maybe things felt normal and nice, but like we were actively ignoring a lot of deep systemic issues
Mm-hmm.
that are now really in our face, which is,
Right.
it looks painful, but it's good that they're in our face.
Mm-hmm.
So we have been going through this garden of gentle sanity, and then this thing hits us, and it's not a little chestnut. It's,
Right.
it's a coconut. A giant coconut falls out of a tree, hits us, knocks us to our knees. And what happens? We probably want to curl up in a ball and hide out and hope that this whole situation goes and picks on someone else or something like that. No, the idea is it's a coconut of wakefulness. We're actually being given an opportunity when things fall away for us to create something new, to start
Learn.
new directions. And I think
Yes.
it's an interesting moment in society because it's happening, and we sort of all as a society are sort of like, oh, I guess this can happen, but I'm fine. It's like, no, this is happening to all of us. And how do we want to emerge? How do we want to change? Even in the last few years, I've been looking at my life and saying like, oh, like shit has hit the fan for me. Shit has hit the fan for my family. Any number of things. And even before the pandemic. And okay, how do I look at that, see my way through it, change in accordance with the person I want to be, as opposed to trying to cling to who I have been?
Right. And even if you do look back into who you have been, it's okay. It's all right. It doesn't exist anymore technically, right? And at this moment, this very moment that you're waking to how you have been, this is the moment that exists which you can change. So
Yeah.
you can start now, right? You don't have to dwell on who you were before, right? And that's a funny thing where I also hear a lot of people claiming, about the little man inside. You got to kill the little man inside. It's like, no, 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 don't do that. Be friends with it,
Right.
you know? And it was funny because like the way that I kind of learned about that was because I don't so much anymore, but I did at some point really like reading about like conspiracy theories and like and like the dark, serial killers and murders and like stuff that didn't go that go went unsolved and things like that, right? And it was funny because it was more of like befriending a certain darkness that I just kind of had, but I never really acknowledged, right? And like you start looking into it, but more so in like a way that you can appreciate the real beauty in everyday life, right? Like these are like the really dark sides of people, but you start feeling empathy in a certain way where it's like this person was hurting a lot, and they could have found a way to better themselves or how they felt, and they could have had some sort of lifting of their own vibration and energy in some way, but it's like I learned a lot from looking into that side of me, and there's a lot of things that now make us uncomfortable about, whether it's society or your own internal things that came to your face, right? Certain things that came to light. Don't I mean, again, not dwelling into the past, but observing them and befriending the fact that, hey, that happened and it's okay. Right? And I think once we start learning how to befriend each ourselves, then we can start really doing that with others. It's transcendent.
Beautifully put. Now, not to kick the dead horse around meditation, but one of my favorite words for meditation in the Tibetan language is gom. It's a very simple word, Gom. And it can be translated as meditation, but it's also translated as become familiar with or familiarization. So the notion that meditation is at its core a way of becoming familiar with all of who we are.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the good, bad, and the ugly.
Mm-hmm.
There's no whitewashing. And I've been very clear in my, quote unquote career of a meditation teacher that I don't have it all figured out, and I'm working on myself. Right? This is what we all are doing, and maybe I've been doing this a little bit while, and I can help people who are newer to it. And I also study with people who have been doing this for a lot longer than me, and we sort of help each other out as we go. But the idea here is that if we're going to become familiar with ourselves, as you said, that's the chance to befriend ourselves. How do we, if you meet a friend, I was going to say at a barbecue, but who's going to barbecues right now?
Right.
Anyway, you meet a friend at a barbecue and you like that person, and what do? You want to spend more time with them. You want to become familiar with them. You get to know them better. Mm-hmm. And then you spend more and more time with them. At some point, you're like, oh, I really like my friend. You look over your shoulder a few years later, I love my friend. Mm-hmm. And it's because you've been spending time with them in this quality time. If you turn to that friend early on, you're like, you jerk, why don't you just do what I want you to do? That friend's not going to hang out with you. You don't want to hang out with them.
Right.
Same thing with our mind. Same thing with ourselves. If meditation's a way of becoming familiar with ourselves, that's how it starts. We spend time with ourselves. We get to know ourselves better. At some point, as you said, we befriend ourselves. Mm-hmm. At some point down the road, we might even say, oh, I love myself a little bit more. Mm-hmm. I actually embrace and accept myself fully because I've been spending so much time with myself. I accept all of who I am.
Mm-hmm. And it's almost like, I guess for me, it goes hand in hand with, like you said, like looking into those certain subjects and like learning about yourself, right? I feel like that's what meditation is, not only because like it's peaceful and calm to return to your breath in that present moment, right? But even being grateful for those idle thoughts that come to mind, right? Because I feel like once those thoughts come into your mind and you realize that you're thinking, that's a moment that you step outside of being the thinker, right? You step outside of that and you realize this is just a thought. This is not happening, right? And you set it aside. And those are the times that, like, whether you like it or not, those little thoughts end up teaching you about yourself. So even though technically the achievement of meditation comes to calming that mind and learning how to give yourself that spaciousness, even in the traffic that's coming into your mind, it helps you learn a lot just in those little fleeting seconds of thoughts that happen, right? And in doing that is when you are able to become friends with yourself. And in general, when you do inject that spaciousness out in the world, when you're not meditating, befriending yourself really means, at least to me, it really means saving yourself, saving your peace, right? Minding your peace, because that friend is going to tell you, you don't need to worry about that. It's okay. Like, or if you find yourself judging somebody or something, right? It's like, you don't really know that about that person, so just leave them alone, right? like that's what I feel really befriending yourself is, not only acceptance of your past or present or whatever, but also recognition of what it is that you're doing at that moment, and being friendly enough to yourself and honest to tell yourself, watch what you're doing. Right. And a thing that really stuck to me on one of your books, and I think it was Walk Like a Buddha, you mentioned how if you have an opinion and someone has a conflicting opinion, then you have a problem. And if you let go of that opinion, then you don't have a problem. you know, and being a friend to yourself to tell yourself that, that's where you gain peace.
Beautifully put. Yeah, I think that was pulling from the work of the Korean Zen master Sung Sun. And that's exactly it, where it's like, oh, when I soften, and you talked about this earlier, when I soften in response to someone else's rigidity, where does that go? That every time we actually show up for another person, this is, I mean, bringing it full back to like Take Back Your Mind, the book on stress and anxiety, you know, it's someone shows up in our face and they are stressed out and they are acting in a confused way as a result of that. They are not feeling peaceful.
Right.
What do we do? Do we immediately react and magnify that energy, or do we soften in response? And there's a completely different analogy in the Zen tradition, which is that if you have ever seen a bull, a very like angry bull, and I saw this once on television. There's a rodeo on at a bar that I was at, and I never really actually witnessed this before. But they rile up the bull in a small space, and that's why the bull's so angry by the time that he gets out, and he's kicking, and he's, you know. And yet, if we put the same bull in a wide open field, at some point that energy would just exhaust itself.
Right.
And then it would calm down and we could approach it and communicate with it. So same thing when we are finding, as you said, people with really either rigid opinions or people who are very angry or stressed. How do we soften and create enough space for it not to like lay down and be a doormat, to be clear, but soften enough so that we're not just sort of magnifying the situation, reacting in a way that actually creates more harm than good.
Because in those times, no one's listening. When the bull is all riled up and kicking about, the bull's not listening to someone saying, calm down, or you shouldn't be angry right now. No one's listening, right? Like they only listen once that energy is exhausted. So if you create that space between yourself and that other person, it doesn't matter what your opinions are or what theirs are. It's not up to you to change anybody's perspective or anything. But if you are after communicating and trying to have that conversation, the time isn't when they're kicking about. The time is after you've already met them with open-heartedness and that spaciousness, right? That's when the time is right. And so with that being said, the time is right for the book, right? And where are people going to be able to pick this up? And I guess specifically, who would you say this book is for?
Yeah, it's a good question. It also reminds me of an important part of it too. This, I think, like some books, like The Buddha Walks into a Bar, I get emails from people being like, "I'm not your target demographic," I'm some grandmother or something like that. And it did sort of skew to a younger audience. But I do think that this book is literally, it's not for someone who has their act together. It's for someone who's pretty much freaking out all the time.
Right.
It's sort of like if you're in an extreme state of stress and anxiety, yeah, there's something short and helpful in here for you. And it may not necessarily, as I said before, be the formal meditation. There's many techniques that are offered throughout the book that say, okay, try this. This doesn't work, try that. Within all of that. So that's the who. Where would be Amazon primarily, and then within, I mean, it's just such a weird world right now that it will be distributed into independent bookstores. It's just figuring out when and how that happens.
Okay.
So, I think Amazon, unfortunately, I don't love that we all have to go only to that source. I think Ingram Publisher is also another one that has copies that people can order. So that's good. And I'll be posting, once it goes live, I will post all sorts of things on my website, which is lodrorinzler.com. But then the thing I've forgotten to mention, which is actually sort of important, is that this is coming out through a small publishing house that myself and a few people have started.
Awesome.
Publications. I'm saying it for the first time. Dharma Club Publications is a collective of meditation teachers. And, we'll see more work from this group soon. But I have the distinct honor of sort of leading the pack in terms of launching this book through our little imprint. And part of why we're doing this is so that we could actually work with the proceeds in a way that feels really good. I really deeply appreciate all the publishers I've worked with in the past, but here, when you self-publish in the form of an independent publisher like ourselves, the money comes to us and then we can actually spend it in ways that feel really meaningful. So all of the proceeds for this book, Take Back Your Mind, they're split to either Feeding America, which is the collection of food banks, or the Loveland Foundation, which is offering therapeutic resources for Black and brown women and girls. So that's where all the money is going. Like, you buy this book, you are simultaneously, hopefully, getting help yourself, but you're also helping people who may not have access either to food or healing modalities.
And as far as the therapeutic services, I guess what is involved in those therapeutic services? What kind
Often
of work
it is
are those?
directly therapy.
Okay.
Healing trauma and healing past pains and it's a really beautiful service. The current executive director, it's a weird small world story where I reached out to them and I was like, you don't know me, but I actually really appreciate the work you're doing in supporting people who may not normally have access to these healing modalities. And the woman who wrote me back is the executive director, and she's like, actually, I read The Buddha Walks Into a Bar years ago, and that pushed me into philanthropy, and now I'm here.
Right.
So
That's
I mean, it
awesome.
sort of feels like, kismet to some degree. It's really a beautiful situation. So I'm really glad to be able to support them alongside Feeding America.
Awesome. Yeah. And that, honestly, then that's funny because it's very similar to exactly why I myself am here, right? Look, this podcast is really and I guess a growth from the idea that we can have a more mindful society, and we all have a part in being able to build that. And in the way that you were able to write these books and do all these things, right, there's every way that all of us can do something in some way to have openness and open-heartedness and mindfulness within each other and everybody else and everything else. And it's got to be between us, right? We all have to be able to teach that to each other and be receptive to it. And even with me starting the podcast, there's other people that are saying that they've wanted to start their own podcasts because of that, and it's transcendent. It's just same, like all of us, we feed off each other. And where can someone that is hungry for some sort of knowledge, understanding, and connectivity, where can they get that lunch? Where can they go get it from you? Where is it that where would you send them to connect with you and to get more information about the book and more information about the mindful program, the publishing company? Like, where can they go see all about that?
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. You're getting a hot scoop here because I haven't even announced the book publicly yet. So,
oh man,
and then we'll share all the good work that we've been doing here, and Dharma Club publications and the whole 9 yards. So, LodroRinzler.com is a shorter answer, and people can join my newsletter, and that's where everything sort of comes out. As you saw through, as well as like the month of mindfulness and everything that I'm unrolling, it all comes out through there. So. I try not to use everyone's inboxes,
Right.
Just sharing the pertinent stuff and hopefully helpful stuff that helps them with stress, anxiety, and meditation.
Right on. Well, thank you very much. And thank you for coming. It's been a pleasure. And it's really helped me, and all the books that you've done, and all the ones that I've read, and all the things that, you're putting out there. It's very inspirational. It's very helpful, and it's important work for sure. And I thank you for your time, and thank you for coming for sure.
Thank you. That's very sweet of you to say. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Rest of your day. I really appreciate you having me here.
Likewise. Thank you. Thank you guys for listening. I'll catch you guys next week. Bye.